Americans are the most loving, God-fearing, fair, least discriminatory people on the planet. And they want to know that if you're waking up and thinking about harming American citizens, or if American citizens are taken hostage and kept in dungeons, or if you're a foreign power sending fentanyl to poison our people, something really bad is going to happen to you and your friends and your cousins and your bank account and your mistress and whoever was involved.
Alex Karp didn't hold back at the Reagan National Defense Forum. This fiery exchange left the panel stunned. Let's break down why his message is making waves and what it reveals about America's position on global threats. If you care about America, this is a must-watch.
And, you know, when Americans are spending $1 trillion on defense, what I want and what I think my peers want is, why are these people keeping our citizens hostage, torturing our people, attacking our allies, maligning us in what was once called the United Nations, basically a discriminatory institution against anything good? We need to stand up, and those people need to be scared. And that's why this conference is so important, because we have the best products in the world, and we cannot have parity. Our adversaries do not have our moral compunction. If it's even, they will take advantage of our niceness, kindness, our desire to be at home in Nebraska or New Hampshire or wherever we live in our peaceful environments. And they need to wake up scared and go to bed scared. And if you give that to the American people will go back and say, and honestly, probably shouldn't say this is why I thought the Democrats were going to lose the election, why they did, because people want to live in peace. They want to go home. They do not want to hear your woke pagan ideology. They want to know they're safe. And safe means that the other person is scared. That's how you make someone safe. And the average American person understands this. Unfortunately, many of the intellectually captured institutions, funneled and intellectually owned by the Berkeley faculty, do not. And that's what they want. It's sure as hell what I want. And that's what Palantir and all the people in this room, I hope, we're here to serve the American people. And my version of service is the soldiers are happier, the enemies are scared, and Americans go back to enjoying the fact that we're the only one with a real tech scene in this country, and we're going to win everything. That's how I see it.
The emphasis on fear as a tool for safety highlights the increasing role of psychological warfare in modern defense. This perspective underscores how crucial companies like Palantir are in staying ahead of adversaries who exploit any sign of weakness.
Would you like to respond to that, or?
I substantially agree with it. So, you know, Alex and I have talked a lot. My interpretation.
I want it to be fair. To give you
no, fair enough. I don't disagree with that, but I do. There's one point that I think is important to make in there. I think he's absolutely right. And when you talk about, you know, if Democrats look at this election and say we lost because America wants America first, they're fundamentally missing the point. I think we lost because the Democratic coalition is fundamentally broken, primarily because folks on the far left have a disproportionate amount of influence in the policy and a complete unwillingness to adjust their message. But the one point that I want to make is, I don't just want people to be scared of us. Okay, I love Alex. I think that's part of it, all right? But if we go to the rest of the world and say—
Our enemies.
Fair enough, but the broad sweeping statement like that is going to make a fair number of people in the world ever so slightly nervous about who we interpret to be our enemies. So I think part of the message, well, you know, no better friend, no worse enemy, right? That's what the military says. We got to focus a little bit on the no better friend part, not just on the no worst enemy part. I would say we need to balance those two. That's the main point I'd like to throw out there.
How do you balance being a trusted ally while ensuring adversaries remain cautious? Leaning too heavily on fear might alienate potential partners, but can America afford to soften its stance in a world filled with unpredictable threats?
So I want to move into one of the main areas of the world right now where there is conflict, where that conflict has been grinding on now for some time, and where the next year could be very critical. That's Ukraine, Morgan. This survey question asked, do you support the United States sending U.S. weapons to Ukraine? And you can see there's a slight downtick. But to me, what stands out about these numbers is that both Democrats and Republicans, there's been a bigger drop in the ideological sides of the spectrum here. Ukraine is grinding out this war with Russia. At what point do you think that it will have to end? And with this incoming Trump administration, what do you think is the most likely prospect for a resolution?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think we have to frame it. First of all, I do think the American people voted for an America First foreign policy. If you look beginning in August of 21 through every year, actually, if you just look in the first 3 months of the Biden presidency, we saw Hamas attacking Israel. We, of course, saw Kabul fall to the Taliban, Russia and Ukraine. Again, Hamas attacking Israel, Iran behind it last year. It's still holding American hostages, as Alex pointed out. So I actually think that the American people do want an America First foreign policy. I don't think an America First foreign policy is isolationism, and I've written on this extensively. What Americans are concerned about is entanglement abroad, overextending ourselves, and not having clearly defined goals. So when you look to Ukraine, this is something that's very frustrating that this war even happened in the first place. So at President Trump's State Department, in the last 2 years of his administration, we focused on deterring Russia from invading. We provided that lethal aid. We produced more sanctions and more actions against Russia than any administration since the Ronald Reagan administration. We're very focused on deterring Russia from invading. They did not do it on our watch. So we do have to look comprehensively at why we had that deterrence failure and almost every major theater around the world, because if we don't tell ourselves hard truths, if we don't learn the lessons of why we have had these massive deterrence failures around the world, we'll repeat them. So when you look at ultimately, how does the Russia and Ukraine war end? It ends the way every other war ends, which is a negotiated settlement, the way that doesn't necessarily make all sides happy. But Americans have to ask themselves hard truths. We've seen the Indo-PACOM commander talk about this. When you look at these polling results, I believe it shows Americans want to be more engaged, but they don't want to be overextended. And giving Americans platitudes and saying that, well, we're in it, till the end, or whatever the Biden administration platitude was, I don't think that works for the American people because it wasn't a clearly defined end game. It didn't provide measurable steps and a path towards success. So I don't speak on behalf of President Trump right now, but I would say that he made clear to the American people in the campaign that he wanted to help see an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine, between Hamas, Lebanon, Iran, and Israel. And that's his commitment to the American people. And in the 2016 campaign, he really worked to actually deliver on those campaign promises. I suspect that's what you'll see in a second Trump term, that he will be working and negotiating, again, from a position of strength. And I think that's where he would take issue and do it differently than this current administration.
If Americans are frustrated by endless commitments abroad, how does any administration effectively strike the balance between engagement and restraint? Supporting Ukraine requires a strategy that not only deters adversaries like Russia, but also demonstrates a clear path to resolution. Without defined objectives and measurable progress, public support will continue to erode, leaving our allies vulnerable and our own position weaker. Can we truly lead if we can't articulate what success looks like?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Two quick points on that. One, the reality of actually governing and making those decisions, I think, is going to prove more difficult. But the second is a real plea. If all of that is true, then Donald Trump and the Republicans should support funding Ukraine's defense. The fact that Donald Trump and his campaign did not support the supplemental aid package that went to Ukraine, and it was delayed for 6 months, had a devastating impact on the war. So yes, negotiated settlement. We're not going to get to a negotiated settlement if the Trump administration position is no more money for Ukraine. Okay, I get the whole America First thing, but you're not going to stop Putin by telling Ukraine we're not giving you anything more. So I just hope, and I know a lot of Republicans in this room 100% agree with that. I'm just urging the incoming administration, keep supporting Ukraine if you really want them to survive. Crucially important.
Senator Fisher, on that very point, the incoming Vice President, J.D. Vance, has said he does not think the United States' focus should be on Ukraine. What is the Senate going to say about that?
I think Morgan made an excellent point that we have to communicate better with the American people. I have asked the question early on with the war in Ukraine, what's the end game? What are we trying to achieve here? And to my colleague in the House, I would say, that the administration didn't act, I think, soon enough in sending what was needed in Ukraine for them to be able to address the threat that the Russians brought in, to give them the needed munitions. I raised questions early on about munitions and sending munitions to Ukraine, and we need to make sure we have in this country what we need as well to protect our homeland. But this all goes to being able to have a policy that is understood by the American people, and to be able to communicate that policy to the American people. The first question about the support that we have for the United States to be involved around the world. We only have support like that if the American people, first of all, understand the threats, and secondly, understand what the strategy is, understand how we're going to achieve goals in order to do that. I am worried about being able to translate support for policies that are clearly understood and translate support for our military into funding it. You know, we see a lot of members in Congress overwhelmingly vote for the NDAA. How many vote to fund it? How many then follow through on the appropriations process and vote to fund it? That's where the rubber meets the road. You have to be able to translate support for our military, which is what a vote for the NDAA does, but then step up and fund those programs, fund those needs, and make sure that we can follow through on the policies that are set and achieve goals, achieve victory. So I'm looking forward to see how all that translates in this administration and in Congress.
Is it possible to sustain public support for foreign policy without transparency and clear communication? The point about connecting military funding to strategy is critical. Citizens want to understand the stakes and the endgame, especially in complex conflicts like Ukraine. Without a compelling narrative, will leaders be able to justify the sacrifices necessary to achieve long-term stability?
Dr. Karp, I do want you to jump in here because I think that you do this very well. So can you make the case?
Thank you. What else do I do
make
well?
the case. Absolutely nothing, right? But make the case for, if you were to do what the senator is asking, how do you explain what the policy in Ukraine is for, well, the purpose of it?
This is just as a general macro thing, more as like a boring business lesson. Palantir, I think, is the largest by market cap defense startup in the world, and many of the people in this room are former Palantirians. We just did an announcement with Andrew, and then we have Doug Philippone, and basically your future is powered by us. Maybe not directly, but we were the most hated, most pariah, most disliked. We used to do meetings like in the backyard of the backyard of the backyard because you couldn't be seen with Palantir. And the reason I'm mentioning this is not just because I'm proud we succeeded, and quite frankly the people hated and us didn't, which makes me happy, but is that when you're dealing with skeptics, what we have in this country is a legitimation crisis. There is no one in this country, no expert, that where they say something and the American people are going to say, I 100% believe that's true because you said it. We didn't have that in the 50s. In the 50s, there was a famous professor, Ken Arrow. If he said you were smart, you got tenure. Because who would know better than Ken Arrow? And this was in every area. We do not have that in any area. So this is why I think the Doge is a crucial stuff. We have to measure what is it being spent on, what is the output? Is the input less than the output? And then you have to explain what is that output? The only thing that will cure a legitimacy crisis is measurement. And that's where we are in this country. And anything else is a platitude because honestly, and I tell this with great respect to experts, no one's listening. Everyone's thinking you have an agenda. Everyone thinks you're working back from who you like. My favorite example of this are analysts on Wall Street. The whole methodology they have is just a way of telling you if they like you. So what would I do in any of these cases? This is what we're spending. This is the outcome. And in a legitimation crisis, you got about 6 months. And this is true for everything in our country, whether it's Ukraine, Israel, spending, lethal systems, healthcare. We need to prove there is no one who can stand up. We don't have Ronald Reagan now.
A crucial point here is the need for measurable outcomes to rebuild public trust in U.S. foreign policy, particularly when it comes to aid to Ukraine. The challenge we face today is that many Americans no longer automatically trust the decisions made by so-called experts or government officials. This is particularly true when the public is asked to support large-scale foreign interventions without a clear understanding of how the funds are being used or what they are achieving. In the past, experts might have had more sway, but now, skepticism is widespread. People are looking for more than just assurances. They want results. The lack of transparency in measuring success makes it difficult for the American public to fully support foreign policy initiatives. If we can't demonstrate tangible, measurable results in Ukraine, it's hard for many to believe that continuing support is in the best interest of the U.S. That's why it's so important to shift the conversation from abstract goals to clear, understandable metrics. Without this, the system is likely to lose credibility and public backing for further action.
Well, look, I think you're right. I think we're well past 6 months. I do want to just follow up on that and ask you, we're well past 6 months, right? So we've passed the window of opportunity.
No, I mean, like, you make decision. Look, the reality is that we have an incoming administration. I believe they have
6 months.
But they have a massive mandate.
How do you make, if you believe that Ukraine should continue to get weapons, how do you make the case, given the facts on the ground, that it is worth it, the value proposition for Americans is worth it?
I can take this. Yeah. I don't know, Alex, if you want.
Yeah,
no, look, and note of bipartisan agreement. I was very frustrated at the Biden administration's communication strategy. And believe me, if you sat in a lot of the classified rooms when they came in and would say things to us, I had some very substantial arguments with, can you just clearly state the policy? And from the very beginning, Colin Kahl clearly stated the policy, which is sovereign democratic Ukraine, don't get into a war with Russia. That was our strategy, and yet it bounced all over the frickin' place and was not clearly explained. So I agree with you, okay? Now, you say, okay, it's not clearly explained, so therefore we're just going to abandon Ukraine and let Russia take them. That's the part where I had a little bit of a hard time disagreeing with it. It's like, we're not going to vote to fund them because, I don't know, I just don't think Biden really explained that one part very well. I mean, that was not going to do it. Ukraine was going to be taken over by Russia. Why is this important to Americans? Is because if you allow autocrats to believe that through force and violence they can take what they want, they will take more. And also, J.D. Vance's point that we should be focused on China, not on Ukraine, also made me insane, because Xi's watching. And if Putin's able to take Ukraine and it works, that opens up the door to him that, yes, this is a possible way to do it. And then you've got more war. Look, sorry, Ronald Reagan. Peace through strength and deterrence. If autocrats think that they can take what they want, then it is going to be bad for all of us. And right now, the one place in the world where that is most clearly happening is Russia and Ukraine. Granted, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on, civil war. It's been a problem. Russia basically looked at Ukraine and said, yeah, we want that. We're going to take it. Okay, and we're going to take it because we're strong enough to do it. There's nothing you can do about it. If we don't stop that, I mean, that is the absolute definition of failing at peace through strength. And yes, I agree, Biden administration did not do a great job of explaining all of that. But I also think that a lot of Republicans took that as an excuse to not support Ukraine because for some reason, Trump didn't want to support Ukraine. He didn't want more money going to Ukraine. And that really also undermined our ability to show strength.
The lack of clear communication from the Biden administration on the Ukraine conflict has led to confusion and political gridlock. However, the failure to act now could have far-reaching consequences. Allowing autocrats to expand their territories through violence without facing any pushback would signal to the world that might makes right.
But there's also the counterexample is Israel. And my sometimes former party, it's like Israel's done very well. And, it's like My version of it is that's how you roll. And, it's like, why don't we learn from that? I mean, and we don't learn from it because we have way too many people in this culture who are living in the faculty lab of their own ideology, and the rubber meets the road for the West, and you're attacked and massacred. You have to fight, and you have to fight to win. I know we're brothers in arms on these things. I'm not saying and honestly, the acoustic is so you can assume I didn't even hear. But I'm not saying I disagree with you. But I'm just saying, again, business 101. What worked, and we're not allowed to learn from what worked because, quite frankly, half the people or a lot of people are committed to an ideology that will not allow them to win, and I think the American people notice that, and again, I think a lot of this comes down to legitimation. Like, if you have to prove that one of the blessed things about this country, and I spent half my life in Germany, learned very pro-European culture. We're not that ideological. We want to know it works, and we want to know that Americans are being put first, and that's and if you're getting in the way of that, the American people aren't happy. And I think there's a lot of that in these discussions.
The U.S. could stand to learn a lot from Israel's successful military strategies, especially in defending its sovereignty. The reluctance to adopt proven methods, often due to ideological opposition, weakens our position on the world stage. The American people want results and solutions, not ideological battles. When national security is on the line, practicality and effectiveness should come first.
So you're bringing up the next big conflict that's on the minds of the American people. And as with so many of these, the responses that we got in this survey, they suggest that there's some complexity here. So let's take a look first, the preference for the future of the Middle East conflict. This is between Israel and Hamas. The country is basically evenly split on whether Israel should continue the military operation or whether it is time for a ceasefire. And then on a second question, whether there's support for the United States sending weapons to Israel, you see just a narrow majority, 54% supporting that. Obviously, the partisan split is much more lopsided. But when you look at that number, 54%, that's actually just about where the number is for Israel, or for Ukraine, excuse me. That surprised me a little bit, Morgan, in the sense that you would think that there was more support for the special relationship that the United States has with Israel, but it seems to me that this data suggests that A, the American people are ready for some kind of resolution to that conflict, and B, that the partisan divide is kicking in when it comes to Israel, where perhaps it had not been before.
Yeah, I would say October 7th was the darkest day in my career and my life after 9/11, especially being a part of the Abraham Accords team in the last administration. I sat at the White House just a few weeks away from giving birth to my daughter, to a beautiful Jewish baby girl named Medina. And I remember at the White House thinking, my goodness, we've brought peace to the Middle East. What a different life she's going to have. And then to fast forward just 3 years later, to see these horrific attacks, to see the worst killing of the Jewish people on any single day since the Holocaust was gut-wrenching to me in so many, but especially to me having worked on Abraham Accords. So, and what we've seen play in the United States is horrific. And this is where I think, getting to Senator Fisher's discussion earlier about communicating to the American people, when you talk about why deterring Iran and not capitulating them to them matters and has real world consequences, look no further than our college campuses, look no further than our major cities, where we have seen more cases of anti-Semitism than in any other time in modern history. Jewish parents like myself around this country have to think about where we can send our children to school so that they can be openly Jewish. I mean, it's so disgusting. It's so frustrating that we've gotten to this place in America. I think how do we pull back from this anti-Semitism? We've of course seen allegations from the Biden administration that the Iranian regime is behind funding these anti-Semitic protests around the country. We know that they were meddling in the election. We know they're still trying to kill the former president, my former boss, Mike Pompeo, Brian Hook, another, Robert O'Brien, other of my colleagues. We have to think about how ridiculous this is, that a foreign enemy state has the capability and intent to assassinate American officials on US soil. That has to end. And that one of the ways I think that we get to this negotiated settlement between Israel and Hamas and whatever ends up happening is by getting our American hostages home. And I know that so many people were encouraged by President Trump's statement within the past week. I've been away at training. Madam, I've been down away for a month, so I've been out of the news. But I think it was in the past week that President Trump made it unequivocally clear to the terrorists that they must bring our Americans home. I know that he's working with the Biden administration on that. But we have had devastating lack of deterrence in the Middle East. So we have to restore that peace through strength in the Middle East. And how do we do it? We do it by holding the Islamic Republic of Iran accountable. We cannot go back to business as usual with them. President Trump has stated clearly and unequivocally that they will not obtain a nuclear weapon on his watch. He did that in the first term. I believe he has reiterated that policy. So we have to get our Americans home. We have to hold the Islamic Republic of Iran accountable for their involvement in all of this. And we have to stand up against the rise of anti-Semitism in this country and around the world. And we simply cannot tolerate the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism trying to kill American officials on US soil. We're not going back to business as usual on January 20th. All of this has to end.
The way Iran continues to meddle in U.S. affairs underscores the sheer recklessness of allowing adversaries to act with impunity. By undermining American officials and threatening our allies, Iran is not just challenging Israel, but directly testing the resolve of the U.S. As a global power, we must reinforce the principle of peace through strength, especially when dealing with regimes that sponsor terror. This situation isn't just about military power. It's about ensuring that democracy and sovereignty remain untouchable on the world stage.
The IC released a report just on Thursday saying that Iran was now closer to attaining a nuclear weapon. To your point about that becoming a major agenda item, when you look at the survey, there was a question about where the United States should focus its military forces. In this year, it seems like the American people understand it's going to be in all three fronts, essentially: East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Senator Fisher, that is a lot for the United States to handle at once. I'm not saying that they can't, but it is. And I wonder what needs to happen from this point forward to be prepared to deal with crises in all of these fronts.
Well, I would say we can't have three fronts. We have a national defense strategy that prioritizes one front. We're dependent upon our allies. We're dependent upon diplomacy. We're dependent upon economic tools that are available in order to meet more than one front and still be able to address terrorism and other issues. We don't have the capability to have two major conflicts at the same time, let alone three. That has to be looked at. That the reality that we face is that we have two peer nuclear adversaries. I focus a lot on nuclear modernization of our weapons and our platforms. And in order to maintain deterrence, which maintains peace, we have to be able to do that. But when we don't invest in our military at the level it needs to be invested in, the resources that are needed there, we need to be honest about the fact that we cannot address major conflicts all around the world. I also believe, as President Reagan did, that the world is safer when America is involved. So we have to be able to figure out how to make it work. And again, how do we translate recognizing the threats and recognizing the needs and being able to have Congress work with an administration to fund those?
The growing reality that the U.S. is stretched thin across multiple fronts should be a wake-up call. If we continue to spread ourselves so thin, will we risk losing the edge that has made us the global leader in both defense and diplomacy? It's crucial that we focus on building a sustainable military strategy, one that balances our nuclear capabilities with the ability to support our allies effectively, or else we may be forced to pick and choose which threats to counteract first.
Somewhat unrelated to, you know a lot more about this than I do, but I would say one thing that gets somewhat lost in these results is America is in the very beginning of a revolution that we own, the AI revolution. And we own it. It should basically be called the US AI revolution. Every single relevant company in the world is in this country. The second tier of those companies are in this country. The JV of these companies are in this country. There is no other place to do technology really at scale besides America right now. And Europe is basically decided to regulate its basically anemic and non-existent tech scene out of production. All those people want to come to America. The American tech community is booming. And so, behind all of this is a macro backdrop of, this is actually a revolution. It's very hard to see now because it's kind of the beginning innings, and a lot of these large language models, incorrectly applied, are just science projects. But if you have the right layer to implement them, you can actually transform your business in days. And this is happening across America. And it's not happening anywhere else. It's not happening in Europe. No one who wants to build a company in China or Russia, it's happening right here. And that macro trend is going to change everything that we do. Everyone in this room, every trend, war and peace, how we fight, where we fight, are humans fighting, are they not fighting? How do we code those decisions into code because it's too quick? How do we get ahead of our adversaries? And this is actually maybe the first time since we had the bomb and our adversaries before they stole it from us, where we have a massive structural advantage. And when you look at all of these things, like every single question, what the American people are reacting to is often what their space. But this is going to change every single thing.
The United States is indeed at the epicenter of the AI revolution, and this technological shift is poised to transform every sector, from warfare to business practices. This massive structural advantage is akin to the moment when we first developed nuclear weapons, with the world now closely watching our next steps. The true challenge lies in harnessing this power responsibly while ensuring that we don't just innovate, but also maintain global leadership through strategic implementation and foresight.
I want to
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, please do, and then I'll jump.
Alex, how do you calm the fears of people when they hear AI and they think, we're going to see technology take over our lives, and it could be in a very negative way. How do you calm the fears? How do you change the conversation to all the benefits that you have with AI and how we can use it in our military in cases just to do administrative work and things like that?
So first of all, you can be happy that we're asking this question, because the question they're asking in Europe is, why is this not real? So first of all, this question is the right question, because half the world and everyone else is like, oh, it's not real. I'm just going to sit on my soft cushion of yesterday's technology and some lock-in contract that's not going to work because I'm going to ignore the tsunami. So this is the right question. And then these are very dangerous technologies. And quite frankly, if we didn't have the world's worst enemies, I would be up here saying we should regulate this, charge energy, slow this down. And we do have to have a real conversation about who controls these technologies.
Alex raises an important concern. How to calm fears about AI while emphasizing its benefits. The reality is that while AI is a powerful tool, its rapid advancement must be handled carefully. The conversation should focus on practical applications, like how AI can streamline administrative tasks, enhance military efficiency, and help businesses operate more effectively. By showcasing its potential to improve lives, we can change the narrative from fear to opportunity.
Can I ask you that, because that was going to be my question, is it too early in your view for rules of the road? We are already in the realm of talking about AI and warfare, so should there be rules to the road established now?
Well, there obviously have to be rules to the road, but remember, our job, my version, no one else's, people didn't adopt American values because they thought inherently they were superior. This is kind of the German version. When you live there, they adopted them because they worked. Like, we have to win, we have to be ahead of our adversaries. And we cannot have rules that are only for us and not for China. Because then we will get rules, their rules. And we will not like those rules. They're not meritocratic, they're not in favor of gender, race, harmony. This is a culture that does not believe in freedom, does not believe in all the things that bring people in this room, and they will set the rules, just like we did. And so then, but of course you have to have a real discussion. That discussion, again, has to be transparent, because what was happening recently is you had ideological capture of certain companies preventing the rest of us from working. So, and then we do have to have a discussion also, people, like, I think, like, who's doing it? Are these people we believe in? And yeah, it's going to be very hard conversations, but do not forget, we need to win so that we can dominate the hard conversations, because we could lose. And one of the ways we lose is it's very easy to lose when you're ahead. You just get lazy. Like, I'm constantly yelling at Palantirians, get off the sofa the soft sofa of your share price and get back to work. We got to win. It's like, and that's the problem we have in AI right now. We own every company, and we have to actually dominate in the war space, and then build transparency. And people, like political leaders, like the two of you, who are people basically believe they want the best for our country and they're willing to talk to each other, have to be transparent. This is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, these are the benefits. By the way, the other big question Americans have is, well, with all this AI, how do I have a job? Who's going to pay my bills? How is that going to work? Most Americans don't want to sit like in a matrix-like pod and get a payment from some large tech company for dreaming all day about some illusion that doesn't exist. They want work, they want to do things, they want to know that they're going to have health care. So all those things are going to have to be addressed and can be addressed.
While it's clear that AI is becoming a defining force in military and economic landscapes, should we wait for the technology to advance even further before we put rules in place? The truth is, the U.S. must lead in setting standards to ensure that AI works in a way that promotes democratic values. If we don't take charge of this conversation now, how can we guarantee that our adversaries won't impose rules that are fundamentally at odds with everything we stand for?
Maybe the rest of the world has stopped believing that the United States is just better, that we are the good guys in the world. How do you change that? Because it sounds like what our adversaries are doing is changing that by also just giving those, I think you call them undecided nations, things that they need. So how does the United States combat that at a moment when the American public is actually talking a lot about pulling back financially, about spending less, and all of that?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's any maybe about it, okay? I think we have, in fact, gotten to the point where we don't have that sort of universal. We're not as popular as we used to be. Let me just put it that way. You can quantify it in a whole bunch of different ways. But how do we do it? I think you did a pretty good job of outlining some of the pieces of it. But also, I think we are not really engaged in the messaging war, and I think one of the best ways to do it, I could make 1,000 different points here, I don't want to go on too long, so I'll just make one. If we're going out into the rest of the world and saying you need to be with us, it's just like passing a piece of legislation, okay? When I figure out I want to pass something, first question is, who do I need? Okay, who's going to need to vote for it? And then I don't go to these people and say, here's what I want and here's why you should give it to me. I go, okay, what does that person want? Okay, I was able to accomplish quite a bit by figuring that out. We need to think, okay, if we want India on our side, if we want South Africa on our side, what do they care about? okay? Not just, okay, we're better than the rest of the world, so you have to be with us, or here's what we want, and we can help them, and we are in a position to help them in a variety of different ways. So I think the number one biggest thing is to really engage in it. And I don't disagree with your formulation. I think it's a good formulation to say, we got to look at this problem. And right now, I think we're still, I've said it 5 times, so we'll try not to say it too many more times again. I think we're living on our past laurels. And I love Alex's point, you know, when, I think it was, who was it, with Avis, when you're number 2, you try harder. And I always said the corollary to that is when you're number 1, you get lazy. And it's just absolutely true. And we have to fight that. I guess part of it is let's stop assuming that we're number 1. Let's get back to being number 1 and let's go earn it.
It's clear that the perception of the U.S. as the good guys has shifted globally. But how do we change that perception? It's not enough to simply assume that the world will recognize American superiority based on history alone. To regain trust, the U.S. needs to engage in the messaging war more effectively. We can't just say, we're the best, follow us. We have to understand what countries like India or South Africa need and show them how they can benefit from aligning with the U.S. The question is, can we overcome the complacency that comes with being number 1 and proactively prove our value again on the global stage?
I think a lot of this, a counterintuitive stat is roughly between 60, I'll give you 2 counterintuitive stats. Between 61 and 92, roughly, France GDP growth was significantly better than the US's. Okay, and then another kind of counterintuitive stat is 85% of the top 50 companies in the world adjusted by market cap, tech companies, are American. 85%. I would bet that's going to be roughly above 90% next year at this time. So you have a lot of complexity in the world. Like, I suspect our GDP is going to grow in a very different way than our allies. So, some of this, and that's going to adjust a lot of perceptions about us for good and bad. I also suspect one of the things we're going to end up having to do in Europe is how do we do a tech transfer so that they can have GDP growth? And so a lot of these things are going to be really defined by the fact that you could imagine America healthy and strong in 200 years. In 200 years, people up here disagreeing about a lot of things, but in a narrow spectrum, actually, because we all basically believe in fairness, winning, values, that America is the greatest nation in the world. You could have that same room here, and that's in 200 years. But you can't really imagine that in a lot of other Western cultures. And so we're going to have to navigate this, and I think a lot of what we're going to be navigating over the next year is actually going to be different and new. And some people, again, without going country to country, don't like us because they didn't think we had a future. Some people like us a little too much because they didn't think we have a future. There are player haters, and we have to. And what is it? I'll give you an AI trend that I don't quite know how to articulate, but I think is really, really important. And so excuse the roughness of this, but it was the case 2 years ago that the tech was not really strong enough to take your company and reduce it to its essence. So the strength of the reason why Palantir and these newer companies and others, we're essentially essentialists. We reduce everything to the core principle. But now a country and a company and a nation can do that. So the core function of defense is to be lethal for our adversaries and safer for our soldiers. It's very hard to implement that at this scale. The core function of an automotive company is to produce the cheapest, best car, so you get a better product. Hydrocar, it's all, we can actually now do these things. And but then the counterintuitive thing is the most valuable thing for a company, a country, a nation is to have an individual idiosyncratic bias. What makes a company great now is its unique insight, its creativity. What gives America a structural advantage now over every other country is we are actually very different than any other country in the world on any parameter. But the fact is that just allows us to do something completely unique and different. And this uniqueness and ability to express in the world. We did not have this a couple years ago, and we do have it now. And that's going to change a lot of how people view us inside and outside the country, and it's going to be different. I think you're going to see real alignments outside the country, in other countries that people are like that, and some people hate it, and it's okay. Again, I suspect our GDP is going to grow significantly, and many of these countries are not. So just think about
and we are
the pain
already
of that.
The fact that the U.S. tech sector is not only dominant, but increasingly focused on essentialism, distilling everything down to core functions, provides a unique opportunity. It's no longer just about having more resources. It's about having a creative and strategic edge that other nations can't replicate. This capability positions the U.S. to not only grow, but to redefine how industries function globally. As GDP growth shifts in unpredictable ways, particularly with European and other allied countries lagging, America's ability to innovate and stay ahead may be its most powerful asset. The challenge now is to ensure that this creative advantage is used responsibly and effectively, both at home and abroad.
We're already seeing the United States outperforming our adversaries like China in terms of economic growth. It's already happening.
Making is we're going to outperform our friends.
Yeah,
and
our friends as well.
By a lot.
Yeah. I want to take a moment for Doge here, because I know there's a lot of chatter in this room about what that will entail. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are planning to propose cuts. Senator Fisher, I wonder, do you think that Doge ought to come for the Pentagon as well?
I think there are a number of areas in the federal government we can look at, but we have to be very careful about it and make sure that Congress leads it.
Make sure that Congress
leads
it, yes. Which Congress is the
we will.
It's like our job, right?
That's the way that the law works. I wonder though, Ranking Member Smith, do you, frankly, this seems to be an area where there could actually be quite a lot of bipartisan agreement. I think everybody understands the American people want something.
And then I'll shut up. We have a splendor of riches in this country. We have the world's most successful builder ever. Looking at our institutions, Americans want to know that the institutions are efficient, safe, and correspond to their purpose.
Right.
And I'm sure there'll be some rough patches, but I don't know how you do better than Elon looking at these things. And I'm pretty supportive. And again, obviously, we all live under the predicate that we have a constitutional republic. And
can the U.S. government fully embrace the lessons learned from private sector innovation, especially in defense and other key institutions? While there's a lot of chatter about cutting waste and making government more efficient, the real question might be how far America is willing to push these reforms and how quickly it can adapt to the evolving demands of global leadership. As economic growth continues to differentiate the U.S. from its adversaries, improving the efficiency of its institutions might be one of the most important ways to ensure that America remains not just a global power, but a leader in shaping the future.
But Americans want us to set priorities, just like everybody does in their own life. Federal government should set priorities. We should have core duties, core responsibilities. Those are laid out. And we cannot be everything to everyone. Defense is the #1 priority of a federal government. And the more we say that, and the more that the people of this country agree with that, the easier it will be to be able to fund the core duty of the federal government, and that's the national security of this country.
The problem with Doge is it's two separate conversations that are being blurred into one, and the difference between those two conversations is profound. Conversation one is, how can you make the government do whatever it does better and more efficiently? And gosh, that's important. And there's going to be a ton of bipartisan support for that. And I think, I don't know anything about Ramaswamy per se, but Elon Musk, I know what he did at SpaceX. I think he's a well-positioned person to have that conversation. How can you do things more efficiently and more effectively? The mistake is everyone's assuming that that is going to do anything to help us with our fiscal crisis. And that's the truly insane part of this conversation, okay? It's just to sort of forget basic budget math in order to believe that that is true, okay? You can run the place more efficiently, you can run it more effectively, and you can maybe save tens of billions of dollars, maybe, okay? But to get to fiscal responsibility, you have to do what Senator Fisher just alluded to. And that's a great statement about how defense has to be first, but 60% of the budget is mandatory spending. That's Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And I haven't heard a single solitary word out of a single solitary Republican, at least not recently, about how they want to cut mandatory spending. Sure as hell haven't heard it out of Elon Musk or Ramaswamy, and maybe they gave the two of them something that they never give us when we get elected to Congress, because the American people want us to balance the budget while cutting taxes and increasing spending. They never give us the magic wand in order to make that possible. I've been looking for it. I don't know. Maybe Elon Musk got one, and maybe he's going to save $2 trillion without hurting absolutely anything. No, he's not. Okay, sorry. I can stop that speculation.
I've heard.
It's just not going to happen. I hope they make government more efficient. The fiscal conversation is a hell of a lot more difficult to have.
I've heard people suggest that there should be a return of pay-as-you-go.
I'm sorry, but we can throw whatever gimmick you want out there. Gimmicks aren't going to get you there. It's a very, very straightforward math problem, okay? We want to spend one hell of a lot more money than we want to pay for, okay? I mean, that's what the polls show over and over and over and over. It's why, even to this date, I haven't heard anyone say one specific thing worth any money whatsoever that they're actually going to cut. And there's a reason for that. It's politically popular, and God bless Donald Trump's ability to go out there and promise that he's not going to cut anything that people care about, and that he's going to cut every conceivable tax you can think of, and everybody going, yeah, that's awesome, okay? Now, reality will come crashing in on the fiscal side. But what I hope, to put a note of positivity on this,
yes,
I hope we don't lose the fact that just because all of that fiscal stuff is pure fantasy, that it's not really important to try to make government more efficient and more effective. It is, and we need to do that. It's just not going to solve a $34 trillion debt or a $1+ trillion deficit.
All right, I got two.
I think when you look at any kind of efficiencies or cuts to any government program, any government spending, each and every one of us, each and every one of you, needs to propose a program that you personally benefit from that you'd be willing to cut.
That would be a very interesting exercise. One thing I will say, though, is that I think a lot of Americans would probably like to see more of the government run like global entry, just a little bit more efficiently, accomplishing a task in front of them. I have two questions from the audience. I'm going to try to get through them in the last couple of minutes that we have here. Morgan, could you take this one for me? How can the U.S. government effectively counter misinformation that undermines public support for its national security objectives, especially when it comes from foreign malign actors?
Great question. It's interesting. Throughout my career, I've been in the intelligence community, I've been in policy positions, and my last position was a communications position, so I've done all three. And at the State Department, I used to have people come in and say, well, Morgan, we're losing XYZ argument. We need a better communication strategy. And I would often say to them, you do not have a communications problem, you have a policy problem. So when it comes to misinformation around the world, you best counter that with the truth. And I think we need to get back as a country to telling our citizens the hard truths. Why do we have a recruiting problem, a recruiting crisis for many years in this country? We didn't solve it. We actually just lowered the standards in order to paper over the problems that at the core of our military recruitment. It's time to bring the standards back up. It's time to put the people that we need on ships, for example, not to cut them on ships, but to bring the numbers back up and not to paper over our problems, to change the statistics to make it appear as if we've solved the underlying problem, when all we've done actually, again, is just paper over it. So you start telling the American people hard truths about where we are. You know, the message, again, coming out of Indo-PACOM was so important. As Senator Fisher pointed out earlier, it's not just 3 theaters. We also have our own theater here at home. If you look at this election, immigration and border security was a top 3 voting issue in most of the public polls. The American people know that the fentanyl crisis is killing their neighbors, their friends, and their communities. If you get outside of the Beltway, it's a huge, massive problem where you can find almost every family has been affected by the fentanyl crisis. Communities around this country are affected by our border security issues, by the immigration problem. All of these things need to be solved, and while we're trying to figure out how to prioritize 3 theaters, I would argue that the administration needs to prioritize our southern border and the catastrophe that we've seen happening there. And the American people clearly went to the polls and voted on that across ideologicals. So I think you counter misinformation by not papering over our problems, but by telling hard truths. We're going to solve the military recruitment crisis, not by lowering standards. We're going to take the standards back where they are, and we're going to figure out why we have a problem getting young people to sign up and fight and die for this country. If you tell young people around this country that this is an awful racist nation that has a terrible history, why would any of them sign up to fight and die for this country? That's not who we are. And if we can get back to not only in our military recruitment, but if you look throughout our national security organizations, through the intelligence community and others, we have to be honest. Do we have the resources? Do we have the capability to fight in multiple theaters and to protect our border? We know we don't. So let's tell the hard truth to the American people. Let's be very clear. Let's not give open-ended commitments around the world that we can't keep. And I think the American people can accept those hard truths. They can accept reality. What they don't want is chaos around the world. To me, this election was about restoring order around the world, and it was about getting rid of the chaos that we see in multiple theaters. You're only going to get there. We're only going to deter Xi Jinping if we're serious about where we are, if we're serious about rebuilding and improving our Navy, and if we're serious about restoring our economy. You only get there by telling those hard truths, and I think the incoming administration, I certainly hope and pray for the security of America's future that they get those hard truths right. I think they will.
So we are just about out of time. Dr. Karp, can I give you a quick challenge? This is our last question from the audience. If you were to try to say it in 1 or 2 words, what is the biggest gap between policymakers and the public?
I think policy, we're talking about the difference between A+ in tech and B- is the difference between a helicopter that flies and doesn't, basically. And like, it's just, this compounds into every area. And this is where America and California, it's like we're really, really focused on the best of the best of the best of the best of the best and building things. And then you downstream from that, they've all played around with AI. For the sake of our country, I think we should expose policymakers to like Maven, and like this stuff is determinative for life and death, and it's not a play toy. It's going to change everything. And just because the large language model in your desk kind of is, that's like in the ground. It processed correctly. It changes the world. People understand this intellectually, not in our heart yet. It's not emotional, and so that's where there's still a lot of disconnect.
This segment provides a sobering look at the challenges the U.S. faces in both domestic and international policy, particularly when it comes to national security, fiscal responsibility, and government efficiency. The key takeaway is the need for honest dialogue with the American people, especially about difficult issues like military recruitment and the fiscal crisis. The conversation brings into focus the tension between the desire for more efficient government and the reality of a $34 trillion debt. The point about prioritizing national defense is central here, and the speakers rightly emphasize that the government cannot do everything for everyone. There is a call for efficiency within the system, but also a recognition that addressing the fiscal crisis requires more than just cutting inefficiencies. It involves confronting tough issues like mandatory spending. Without concrete actions to address Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, fiscal sustainability remains an elusive goal. As the discussion turns to misinformation, the argument that truth must be at the forefront of public communication on national security resonates strongly. By confronting uncomfortable truths about the state of military recruitment and the challenges at the U.S. border, the government can build trust with citizens, acknowledging the difficult realities rather than hiding behind polished narratives. The mention of technology, especially AI, introduces a broader lens. The disconnect between policymakers and the public regarding technological advancements is an important point. AI is seen as both a powerful tool for progress and a potential risk, but its full implications haven't yet penetrated into the policymaking heart. A more engaged and informed approach to tech will be crucial in making decisions that affect national security and beyond. This forum powerfully underscores the need for an honest approach to the nation's challenges. From fiscal responsibility to national defense and the rise of technology, these issues are interconnected. There is a clear message. Transparency, efficiency, and long-term planning are essential to navigating the path forward. The conversation also emphasizes the importance of not just addressing the symptoms, but digging into the root causes of the problems facing America. The public, despite the chaos and misinformation, is ready to face these truths, and it's time for leadership to rise to the occasion with a clear, consistent, and rational vision for the future.